everyone. Good morning. Welcome to to our second to the last webinar in this trimester. Let's all hear and learn something for our academic research and writing session two with our very own Abhijat Yadar.
So without further ado, without any further delays, I'll quickly jump to the topic because there's a bit of ground to cover here. So what we are going to be discussing today is going to be academic research and writing for those purposes. Is it working? So just to give you an overview, what we will basically be doing today is we briefly touch upon how to structure an essay, which is just taking a very basic look at what essays are supposed to be like. And thankfully, they haven't changed since time immemorial. So the basic structure has remained the same, depending on the nature of the essay though. Also, what exactly do we mean when we talk about developing arguments? How can you develop strong arguments? How can you develop quality arguments that actually carry some degree of weight compared to arguments that you may feel are arguments, but is essentially opinions, which can somehow lead to reduced quality of essay production or essentially dilute the effect of the essay as well as your writing for that matter. Also, we will briefly take a look at how to find quality evidence, or what are some of the easier ways or some of the more convenient ways, ready ways to actually find evidence to inform your arguments, and how to use referencing effectively, as well as what are some of the tools available for referencing. Usually what happens is whenever you're writing a fairly long piece of report or essay or thesis, depending on whatever the document might be, you are expected to reference quite heavily. Now, being able to maintain a list of all the references that have been cited manually can be quite tedious, and there are a number of different softwares that are available freely that you can actually use. So we touch upon them as well. Now, one of the bigger debates as of today is the use of AI. Everybody's well aware that AI is out there. Students use them, faculties use them, we all use them. The question is not whether to use AI or not, but it is how to use it responsibly. What determines inappropriate use versus appropriate use of AI? So that is also something that we will actually spend some time on. What are the ways that you can use it? What are the cases where you are actually expected to use it, and how you can use it to develop your skills that are actually required, as opposed to subvert your skills, right? And specific AI-based tools that are for research. So one of the most common tools that students often rely on quite heavily is ChatGPT. But I know your ChatGPT is not your friend, right? There are specific tools that have been developed that are once again freely available for students to use, which actually cater to research purposes, for literature review purposes, essentially for finding quality evidence, right? That is also something that we will touch upon today. So jumping to the structuring of essays, like I said, since time immemorial, structure of the essays have remained consistent. It has introduction, it has a body, and it has a conclusion. But how do you actually go about writing introduction? What is an effective introduction? How do you go about writing the body of the paragraph? What all should it include, as well as what are the things or do's or don'ts of writing a good conclusion? So simply put, an introduction needs to introduce your topic. This is also the place where you need to make sure that you define any key terms that are going to be used. Additionally, something that is often found to be a common mistake is by the end of the first paragraph, which is typically your introductory paragraph, the reader should know exactly what it is, what the topic is that you are going to be talking about, what is going to be your thesis statement, as said. The thesis statement is nothing but the topic that you've actually chosen, and the first paragraph itself should be enough to inform the reader of what it is that the rest of the essay is actually going to delve into and deal with, right? You should typically have this within the first paragraph. Sometimes we see students tend to extend the introduction to the second or the third paragraph, right? that can once again diminish the strength of the introduction, right? So also, introduction is essentially where you also touch upon the importance of the question that you've chosen. Why is it actually important to take a look at this particular area, or whatever the question might be that you've actually posed? What is its relevance, right? And how this essay will be addressing it, right? Then when you move to the body of the paragraph, depending on the word count, depending on the nature of the essay, whether it's an evaluative essay or descriptive essay, there can be differences. Nonetheless, essays typically do not have subheadings. What you have is a number of different paragraphs, and simply transition from one paragraph to the other tells the reader that there has been a transition and the next point is going to come. Now, this is also something that we will touch on in the argument, in the development of the argument, which is the transition is essentially a common area where students do tend to make slight mistakes. So every paragraph needs to have a topic sentence, right? And the paragraph typically in the body should begin with the topic sentence. Now, the topic sentence is an individual idea or the main idea that that specific paragraph is essentially going to deal with, right? Now, it's also important to make sure that whatever information you've actually presented in each of those paragraphs, they need to be linked back to your main thesis statement or to the idea of, or to the theme of your thesis or the essay, how, and inform the reader how it actually connects to the or addresses the issue that you actually identified. Now, sometimes what happens is for each of these topic sentences, and it should be done for each of these paragraphs, within each of these paragraphs. Why? Because each of them has to be a different variable or different aspect of the issue that you're trying to address. Now, one of the ways to actually make sure that there's not much repetition is to actually collate the topic sentences of each of the paragraphs separately. Now, all of this needs to be done after the first draft has actually been completed. Once you've completed the first draft, and it's actually better to complete a rough first draft rather than trying to polish each paragraph first, trying to perfect each paragraph first, and then moving on to the next, because I can assure you there's no perfect writing. You can keep refining your writing again and again and again, and it may end up building some degree of anxiety or pressure, because the more time you spend trying to perfect one, the less time you have to actually draft the next paragraph. So once you've drafted the first draft, the rough draft, what you can do, what you should do, it's one of the more convenient and one of the more efficient techniques to actually improving your writing, is try and identify the topic sentence for each of the paragraphs in the body that you've actually written, right? And simply take that out or simply highlight it. It's completely up to you how you choose to do that. But either you can highlight it for each of the paragraphs, or you can simply choose to take it out into another document and simply place, okay, paragraph 1, topic sentence A, paragraph 2, topic sentence B, paragraph 3, topic sentence A. That will tell you exactly what are the variables or what are the aspects of it that you've actually been able to address or include. It gives you a much briefer picture and a fresher look at what are the aspects you've touched upon, what might be some you might have missed, or if there's any repetition that's occurring. Second, what it also allows you to do is see how the topic sentences in the present chronological order that they've been drafted connect with each other. So if topic sentence for the first paragraph and for the fifth paragraph tend to be linked better compared to the first and the second paragraph, it can also inform you how to move the paragraphs around so that the flow of the argument seems better connected, rather than jumping from, say, topic sentence of the first to the second, which may have a disconnected feeling to it when the reader actually reads it, right? So it also allows you to do that. Third, something that it actually helps with is if you struggle to find the topic sentence for a particular paragraph you drafted in the body, it actually tells you that that's going to be the experience of the reader as well. They will also feel confused by that paragraph, simply because maybe it's either dealing with too many topics or too many ideas within the same paragraphs. In that case, what you need to do is break that paragraph into separate paragraphs and then identify topic sentences. There should only be one main idea within each paragraph, right? The central idea within that paragraph. Or if it's because there is no clear topic sentence there, that also tells you that the paragraph needs to be developed further and clarity is essentially what is missing from that paragraph. So these are some of the quick techniques that you can actually use to make sure that each of the paragraph contributes meaningfully to your essay, is clear and readily understandable for the reader. Right. Now, also, like I've already mentioned, each of those paragraphs needs to be linked back to the thesis statement. Now, when it comes to the body of the paragraphs, this is also the place where you will be expected to rely heavily on evidence. The reader requires to know, for a certain degree of confidence in your writing to be there, that what you're presenting is not simply your opinions or your feelings, but you've actually undertaken research, which includes current research. So if I were to write on the use of AI, its pros and cons for all of you, and if I were to then give it to you to read, and if the references I've cited, if the evidence I've cited is from the 1980s and the 1990s, I'm not sure how many of you will feel confident about the information I'm actually presenting to you. But if it includes references which are from the past 5 years, I'm fairly certain that the degree of confidence that you would have in terms of the merit of the arguments I'm actually presenting would be much higher than if I was simply presenting something of the 1980s or the 1990s. So the evidence also needs to be current. Now, also the quality of the evidence matters. So whether it's coming from a peer-reviewed journal or if it's coming from a journal that probably has not been peer-reviewed or does not have a proper review process in place, those evidences can sometimes be murky. There's the idea of the grade literature, but we won't necessarily delve into that too much because of the limitations of time. But so that evaluation of evidence also needs to be there beyond just explanation. You're not simply presenting the information, you are describing it, you're dissecting it. You have to engage with what are some of the limitations of that argument, or what are some of the contrary arguments to the argument that you're actually presenting. These are all that we'll once again touch upon when we discuss the argument, developing the argument section, right? So inclusion of references needs to come from quality sources in the body. Now, when it comes to the conclusion, this is again an important area where students often tend to make certain mistakes, maybe because they get anxious in terms of what all needs to be included. Another thing that what I had previously mentioned actually helps with when you collate topic sentences for each of the paragraphs separately, or if you keep them highlighted. When you're writing the conclusion, the conclusion needs to summarize how your essay addressed the topic to begin with. Apart from that, how do you actually do that? What you expect it to do is that each of the main ideas that were touched upon in each of the paragraphs should find a mention in the conclusion. You've worked really hard to develop those ideas. Of course, if you've included them, you know that they mean and they add to the argument you're trying to present, to the point that the point of view trying to present, right? Why would you not want to include them in the conclusion? So when you miss any of those main ideas from the bodies, you're essentially doing a disservice to your own writing, to the own argument that you've developed so beautifully. So collating that information for each of the paragraphs, simply giving you a topic sentence, also sort of gives you a quick view of what all needs to be included in the conclusion so that you don't miss it, right? So the conclusion also restates what your thesis discussed essentially, and make sure that it does not include any new information. There's a difference in suggesting future directions or what needs to be done in the future to address the limitation that might have been identified of the literature you've cited, but that is accepted, that's expected. But if you were to then introduce new evidence in the conclusion to support your point of view, which was not discussed previously, that is not good practice and can have a negative impact on the essay itself, right? Moving on to structuring of the essays. So this is essentially a simplified version or a recap of what we've just discussed. So for each of the paragraphs, stay focused on one idea per paragraph, right? Second, how do you actually guide the structure? Use your topic sentences. See which topic sentences are better connected after you've collated them in the draft. And then you're free to move around the paragraphs to help develop a better flow and better connectivity between the paragraphs, right? So, and of course, link all the ideas back to the thesis. Sometimes the arguments that are being presented or the paragraphs that have been developed can seem to veer off topic, not because the points that are being raised or the information that is being presented is not relevant, but it has not been efficiently or sufficiently been linked back to how those points actually connect back to the thesis statement or the topic you've essentially chosen. That link is missing, right? Now, when we talk about developing arguments, I think I've already mentioned this. When we talk about what exactly is an argument, is it simply an opinion? Or is it something more? An argument is essentially your position or your stance on a particular topic, right? Like the example I just suggested, that AI use for students or AI use in academia, is it good or bad, pros and cons, for or against? So if that's a topic that you would be writing an essay on, you would be expected to take a stance on it, right? But when you do take a stance on it, an argument takes a stance on the basis of evidence. It takes a stance supported by evidence. So you would have had completed some degree of reading, some degree of background research to inform your position, to inform your stance that you would be taking. Like I've already mentioned, once again, the quality of the argument or the quality or the strength of the argument that you will be presenting to support that position that you take is dependent on the quality of the evidence that you choose. And the possibility of bias, and one of the more common biases that most of us often fall into when we're beginning to write, is confirmation bias. We tend to identify information, identify papers, identify literature that already confirms what our position is towards a particular topic, right? So there, what that also does is it tends to disbalance the argument you're presenting in a manner that makes it biased for your preconceived notions, right? So what you need to do here is actively seek out information, actively seek out evidence that contradicts your point of view or the position you might have taken. That is not to say that the position you have taken, you need to completely switch it or you need to change it. But what you need to do is reach a position on the basis of the evidence for and against that you have actually critically engaged with and evaluated, and then have come to that position. Following which you present both sides following which you present both sides with, of course, taking a position of your own. And after you've presented your arguments, after you presented the evidence in support of your position, you've presented the evidence that is against that position or opposes that point of view. You then also further elaborate why the stance that you've chosen and why the evidence on the basis of which the stance you've chosen is probably better or better supported than the evidence that you've actually chosen to, or the stance that you've actually chosen to not go by or not go with, right? Apart from that, limitations even of the evidence you are citing to support your point of view need to be acknowledged, along with the limitations of the opposing points of view. So that also tells the reader that you are not necessarily taking a biased view or reporting selectively. You are taking a very balanced view after engaging in informing yourself, after engaging with critical literature to present an informed opinion or an informed position. Now, how do you search for evidence? Now, there are a number of different ways. One of the quickest ways is to actually look for systematic reviews and meta-analyses, because they tend to have a number of recent literature or good quality literature already included in them, based on which they actually present the evidence, right? It Another advantage of actually looking at systematic reviews and meta-analyses is the fact that there is a quality appraisal of all the literature that was finally included in the review. So it also gives you a ready quality appraisal, and you'll be able to see how each of the papers actually scored in terms of quality. So that also gives you a general idea of what some of the limitations, some of the strengths of each of those papers is. So you find a bank of information, a bank of papers, simply through systematic reviews and meta-analyses. But if there would be many topics on which there are no systematic reviews or meta-analyses yet. So the first place that you should look at is the databases that you have. Now, the issue with databases, you might not necessarily have access to all of them. There are a number of different databases like ProQuest, Scopus, and but if you don't have access to them, Google Scholar is something we all have access to, and I would highly encourage everybody to actually spend time on Google Scholar and try and master searching for literature on Google Scholar first, because it gives you a nice foundation to begin with, to begin from, when you actually proceed on to using databases, right? Because some of the databases are complex, some of the databases are fairly straightforward. And like I said, the level of access on the databases can vary significantly. So Google Scholar does also allow, so there's a screenshot here that you can actually filter it by year, by date. You can add filters in terms of the nature of the articles, the nature of the publication, whether it's a review article, whether it's a report. So depending on the nature of the article you're looking for, you can actually add a filter there as well. Another method of looking for evidence is, once you've identified a paper that's actually useful, going into the references of that particular paper and then finding papers that are either related to the topic that you've chosen. So essentially that's what's termed as backward citation search, which is diving into the citations of a relevant paper and then identifying more papers to work with or to look for, right? And then there are certain AI-based research tools that can help you with identifying evidence or research reviews, finding papers that we will also discuss when we get to the section. You double click it, it's going to ask you how you want to open it, and you choose the software and it will automatically populate that reference in that particular referencing software, right? Now, each of these softwares has a different level of compatibility with Microsoft Word. So when you're typing reports or essays, you're essentially doing that in your Word document. So Mendeley, for example, and Zotero, both of them work wonderfully with Microsoft Word. You can directly cite, so for example, if I were to type a definition of a particular, any particular term, I can, and it comes from a specific reference. After typing that, I can simply click, or I can go to Mendeley and click, and it will automatically cite the add the in-text citation right next to my definition, and I have the option to choose which format I want. So there are drop-down menus there that you can choose for whether you want APA, you want Harvard, you want MLA, you want Chicago. So there's a few of those options, and depending on which format you want, it will format it for you. Now, having said that, none of these are perfect. Right? None of these are perfect, and they can sometimes have minor errors in referencing, but they're easy to edit. You can go into Mendeley, open the reference that you want to use, edit it as and when needed, and then it does not make that mistake again. So it's basically, you need to rectify it once, and then you can use that reference any number of times by simply clicking on one single icon, and it will reference it for you. Now, the advantage of these tools is it doesn't simply reference it for you in text. The moment a citation is added in text, it automatically adds it in the reference list, right? So that way, every time you use an in-text citation, it gets automatically populated in the reference list. And if you're using the same citation in multiple places, it doesn't necessarily repeat or duplicate that in the reference list. So that will still remain as one reference. So it makes things easier. It becomes less time consuming for you, and you don't necessarily need to worry about manually formatting everything in, right? Now, if for any reason none of these options seem to work for you, there are online options, that are online reference generators. However, you would need to manually extract the information from either the website that you're using where you found the information for the research paper. Usually all of that information is presented. or from the PDF. You'll have to extract that information, copy paste that information in the reference generator, and then click after choosing which format of reference you actually want, and then it will generate a reference for you. That adds a bit extra steps. So I would highly recommend Zotero. I've used that personally, so that works great. I've used EndNote also. EndNote can sometimes be tricky, and it's only the basic version that's available for free. Now, whenever you're writing an essay on any particular topic, these are some of the skills that actually come into play. Now, research skills, of course, are absolutely important. Not only these skills are required for writing an essay, these are also all of the skills that are expected are going to be developed throughout your graduate programs, right? And by the end of your programs, once you've graduated, these are the skills that you should have already developed to a significant degree. Now, these skills, of course, get more and more and more refined the more you engage in these activities. Nonetheless, once you graduate, there's a certain level or certain degree of these skills that is expected to have been developed. Now, with AI use, this is the problem that oftentimes these skills are being delegated out to AI instead of you actually being able to develop them. This now brings us to the next section of how to actually use AI appropriately and inappropriate cases of AI. So these are the four areas that we're basically going to look at quickly. So the first is the no usage case. Now, ironically speaking, while I'm presenting information about where it's inappropriate to use AI, I will also accept that the image you see has been developed by AI, the use of AI has been developed by AI. But given I'm not being tested at the moment for my creative skills in terms of designing a picture, it's not necessarily within the context. So based on the context of the task or the assessment task that you're actually undertaking, that itself should inform you of what is or what would be considered inappropriate use of AI. Any quizzes that you're required to take, or recognition or recall tasks, essentially. If you use AI there, it defeats the purpose of the assessment task, and that is completely inappropriate use of AI to begin with, right? So that's just an example. MCQ questions once again, so or even short answer questions. Also, from experience, I can tell you that for short answer questions or single word answers, AI is not your friend. It's comically off the mark. So, but moving on to research, using AI for research, in today's date, almost all research is supported by one or the other form of AI-based tools, right? If you're using AI to streamline the process, to help summarize articles that might be too dense or might be too complicated, or but you still, after reading the summary, have to engage with the actual research article. Under no circumstances can AI replace your engagement or your reading, critical reading of that particular article. Now, another issue with using AI for research is that it is biased. It's biased towards accessibility. It's biased towards popularity. So some of the better known papers, even if they're old, are obviously going to come up. It relies on its information from the papers that are available within its data bank, but not for papers that are not there. Also, it does not always critically engage with the literature the way you would engage with the literature. And most importantly, it tends to hallucinate not only references, but even information for that matter. If you were to ask the AI to summarize a paper for you, while it does summarize the paper for you, oftentimes it might add information that was not there or not intended to be there by the original authors. So one of the ways to actually increase accountability when you're using AI is to actually ask it to also provide quotations from the paper and identify where those quotations are when it's summarizing that information, so that you know where to look for that information in the paper itself, right? So when it comes to brainstorming and planning, it can be a great tool if you're using it to bounce ideas. Uh, you can pretty much use it as an assistant to discuss ideas and to generate new ideas, especially when you find yourself getting stuck or when you have a writer's block. It can be a great jumping board. It's like a diving board, right, in a diving competition. But at the end of the day, when that assessment task is submitted or when that essay is submitted, You are being assessed for the quality of your writing and for the quality of the production of the essay. It is not the AI's ability that is being assessed, it is your ability to write and develop that idea that is being assessed. So while you can take some degree of pointers, but the final decision of how to approach the task, how to approach the essay should not be determined by the AI. That should be your decision, because that is a skill that you are actually required to develop, right? Another thing is, a lot of the time students, and it's a common occurrence across campuses, that students think that they can simply provide and feed the assessment information to AI and it can address everything that's there in the marking criteria. I assure you it cannot. It does not understand your subject, it does not understand your course, nor does it understand the context within which you're writing, right? So it cannot tailor responses to address those kinds of assessments because those require fairly complex processing, which AIs at the moment do not necessarily have. So your markers also do get to know, and more importantly, you don't necessarily develop the skills that you are required to develop, right? So this is the stage where of your life, of the course, where you actually have the opportunity to learn, get feedback, because writing as an exercise is developed as a skill. It's developed through practice and feedback. You can refine your writing across your lifetime. There's never a time when you've completed or mastered that skill, right? So don't necessarily feel anxious to impress the reader to or feel stressed about wanting to sound a certain way. Another issue with AI is it tends to take away your voice. It completely sterilizes the argument of any human take. But what you can offer in the essay is something that makes it qualitatively richer compared to what the AI actually writes for you, right? Now, if you're using spell check or Grammarly or even inbuilt softwares like Microsoft Word has, that is still fine. But I would still recommend that you keep, but I would highly recommend that you keep a pre and post version of the document. Even if you've used AI for brainstorming, it's fairly easy to actually keep a log of all the conversation you had with AI, because that might be a requirement, and that is a requirement that journals now have if you're trying to publish papers. That you expected to admit to using AI if you have, and have logs of what the purposes for which you've used. You might be required to actually submit them, right? Any software that completely rewords or rewrites and changes the tone of the writing is considered inappropriate, because it is essentially not a piece of writing that you've produced. Right. Now, moving on to tools for research. The first one I've mentioned here is Consensus AI. It I also have the screenshot. So it's fairly helpful, and it's free once again. So whenever you want to conduct a literature review, or whenever you're trying to find quality evidence, now the research tools that I've mentioned here, each of those can actually be used, and there are different levels of complexities for each of these tools. So simply, if you were to run a search, it actually shows up in terms of the quality of the evidence, not just the quality of the evidence, but what the consensus is, what are the number of papers that support the idea, what is the percentage of the papers that actually do not support the idea, what is the percentage that actually shows that the findings are mixed, so on and so forth, along with the papers that have been cited in thread or the papers that have actually shown up for that information. You can actually find those papers right there, right next to you, instead of having to go through each of those search things manually. Similarly, you have Research Rabbit. Now, Research Rabbit actually allows you to develop your own collection of papers. So if you're working on a project and you run a search and you find a number of different papers, you can simply add them to your collection and see which authors are actually interconnected. As you might be able to see from the picture, apology, it's a bit small because of the space, but it'll show what authors and what papers are interconnected, which ones have been cited more, which ones have been cited less. Not only does it tell you what papers are well interconnected, but also what are the aspects of the topic that have been worked on more compared to certain other aspects or certain other factors where the research might be limited. So it further helps you identify certain gaps or limitations of perspectives that have been taken to approach a particular topic. So I would highly encourage everyone to actually take a look at all of these tools, play around with them, familiarize yourself with them, and then see which one you might want to use depending on your level of comfort. Litmaps is also something that allows you to do something similar, but here the advantage is also that you can simply click on each of these separate authors, the circles that you see, and it will highlight the papers and authors it is specifically connected to, not just as a topic, but have been cited and interlinked with. So based on each of these papers also, it can help add recommendations for other related articles which might not have been cited in these papers. So once again, this actually speeds up the process to find relevant literature and good quality literature. Right? Now, SciSpace is another one where you can actually run literature. However, I would not necessarily suggest this as the first place that you go to. Nonetheless, it is fairly useful. My recommendation would be choose one to begin with and then try and master that one and then move on to the next, because once you've mastered one, those skills are similarly used and applied in searching in the other reference tools. Now, whenever you're writing an assessment or whenever you're writing an essay for any purpose, and if you're unsure of whether this is appropriate or inappropriate use of AI, just ask yourself these two questions. A, is it something that I'm producing myself, or is it something that has completely been reformed and maybe the original idea was mine, but the final product is in fact AI's. Second, is it something that's helping me develop my skills? Is it something that is facilitating my work, or is it something that is completely replacing my own work? Right? If the technically, depending on the answer, you will be able to find out whether the use is inappropriate or appropriate. Right? So this is all for today from my end. I hope everybody found this useful. And if you have any questions or if you need any further clarifications on any of this, please do feel free to write to me, contact me. I'll be more than happy to actually support any questions that you might have, or simply show how each of those actually you can run search strings on.
Yeah, thank you so much, Abby, for that wonderful or for insightful webinar today. I think students have learned a lot from this, especially that the exam is near. Any questions from students while Abby is still here? PPT. Yeah, if they could also get the copy.
Yeah, I can provide the PPT fairly simply. Yeah. But in the resource skills, the skills hub, these are there. So the whole session will be there. So the presentation would also be there. Apart from that, I would also encourage students to actually go to the Skills Hub, because for each of these skills that I mentioned, there are detailed videos that have been linked that students can actually access, and how to choose a topic, how to choose a thesis statement, how to identify a thesis statement, how to develop an argument. Each of those, the Skills Hub is populated with very rich resources, so the students should most definitely access those.
Yes. All right. Yeah, I think most of the students that are here as of the moment are going to be accessing those ones. And also after this one, the recording of this webinar will be posted on our YouTube channel as well and in our Moodle. So it will be added in the Skills Lab. And I hope that those students who were not able to attend in this webinar could be able to watch how helpful this topic is, especially in creating research. So this webinar is actually very important. Thank you so much, Abby, for your time. We really appreciate you doing this. I hope we could see you again next time in our next webinar in our term 3. And yeah, I guess this concludes our webinar today, and see you around.